Good evening. Well, if you got an email today, which everyone who's a member should have gotten, we are trying to make sure that we have accurate contact information. It's something that a lot of our communications, we get bounced back because emails aren't correct or whatever the case may be. We're also getting it set up to where we can do text messages, so that'll be easier to get than emails. And so just check your email, make sure that you got that, and fill it out to update the information. It only takes about 5 minutes to do so. Um, and so, yeah, be looking for that. So tonight, I wanted to spend time addressing a question of, does Jesus really expect me to forgive those who I trusted the most and who betrayed me? So, it's a question that's, in one sense, really easy to answer. I think every one of us can know from Jesus' example with being betrayed by Judas and the fact of how he served him and washed his feet, that we do know that Jesus was an embodiment of forgiving the most undeserving. It didn't matter how much they had done against him or how many times they had failed him, Jesus forgave. We also saw this past Sunday that forgiveness didn't always look like, forgiveness is a nuance. It didn't just mean that God all of a sudden wipes away all of our consequences because he's forgiven us. In fact, our consequences are the arena that we are then sent back into to walk in the fruit of the Spirit to try to bring healing and restoration. But with those who are closest to us, that is often the most difficult group to forgive. Often the most difficult group for us to try to seek restoration with, especially when we have trusted and given, provided opportunity, allowed them essentially within the shield. We took our armor off with them, we put it down, and then to be attacked. It's often the times that we find our heart most hardened and embittered towards somebody. And so how do we do that? Should we even do that? I want to read a passage in Romans chapter 5. It says, but the gift, it's talking about God's grace to us, is not like the trespass. And I want us to stop there for that word trespass. Because see, in the Bible, there's different words that are used for sin. None of us go around and say trespasses, like you have trespassed against me. Like that's just this archaic language. None of us use that. But there's really kind of three words that are used in the Bible for sin. One is sin. And to sin is to do something against God, to do something wrong. And then kind of two words that are kind of like, they've got some nuance to them. One is iniquity. So our iniquities are things that we do that are morally bankrupt, where we are acting out of selfish desires, where we are compromising our standards, where we are doing something that we know to be wrong. That is iniquity. So an example is somebody comes to your house and steals from you. It's iniquity. Trespass is a word that means for someone who there's some sort of expectation or agreement between to break that. It's betrayal. It's an army, or it's two kings who meet and have an agreement for a treaty, peace. And they are shaking hands, agreeing to the terms, and then one king has an archer shoot arrows into his back. In the example of somebody comes and steals from your house, that's an iniquity. But your neighbor who watched you pull out of your house to go on vacation, who talked to you about how long you were going to be gone beforehand, who you've let watch your children multiple times so that you could go on date nights. That person coming and stealing and robbing your house while you're gone on vacation, that's a trespass. This is the relationship of those that you have trusted the most, that you've brought into your innermost circle, that you have let down your guard with. You give them information that they normally would not have, that you don't just display to everybody because it can be used in harmful ways by those who don't have your best interest at heart. The trespass is that person taking that advantage of that situation and betraying you, going against you. And so in Romans chapter 5, it says, but the gift is not like the trespass. He's specifying the betrayal of Adam and Eve. For by the one man's trespass the many died, how much more have the grace of God and the gift which comes through the grace of the one man, Jesus, overflowed to the many? So the trespass, the way that Adam's sin is described here by Paul, is that of someone who had intimate communion with God, who walked with him, who knew with him, that God in essence had let his guard down with. He had signed the treaty with him. He was shaking hands. And Adam betrayed that trusting relationship. So the type of sin that started this whole thing off was the type of sin that is often the most difficult to forgive. And the gift is not like the one man's sin, because from one sin came the judgment, resulting in condemnation. But from the many trespasses came the gift, resulting in justification. For if by one man's trespass, his betrayal, death reigned through that one man, how much more will those who receive the overflowing grace and the gift of righteousness reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ? You see, what Paul starts to contrast in this is that Adam set things in motion and caused death to enter into the world by starting off with a bang and committing the worst sin of betrayal of those that you ought to hold most dear. Whereas then Christ comes as an example of gift of God's faithfulness and grace. Where Adam displayed betrayal when it suited him best, Christ displayed faithfulness when it cost him dearly. Whereas Adam took advantage of a relationship, Christ came and was often taken advantage of, yet displayed tremendous grace and compassion. Where Adam broke a relationship through seizing selfish ambition and wanting to establish what is right and wrong on his own, Christ has come and submitted to the will of the Father and took on the form of a servant and served those who had betrayed him. So he sets up this example, this contrast of Adam who betrays and Christ who restores the betrayer. We see this very clearly in the Lord's Prayer. You see, as the disciples asked Jesus to pray, one, don't you appreciate that it's a short prayer? Like, it wasn't like this 14-page volume that Jesus is like, this is how you should pray. But it's a short prayer. A prayer of 7 verses. Takes you less than 20 seconds to say it out loud. But I also think that there is such depth in these verses where he says you should pray like this: Our Father in heaven, may your name be honored as holy. Your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us of our debts as we have forgiven our debtors. I want you to remember that, because the word there, debts, is talking about that we owed something or they owed it to us. So he's saying, forgive us of our debts. Forgive us for having not given to God what we owed him. Well, if you're in a very trusting relationship with those who are supposed to have your best interest at heart, and then you take that away and you betray them, you owed them integrity. You owed them love. You owed that person many things that at that moment you are now withholding from them. And to show you that this really is the case, if you look down in verse 14, it says, if you forgive others their offenses, or it may also be translated trespasses. What Jesus has in mind when he says in this passage, forgive us of our debts, our trespasses, he is saying that you have to come to a point of acknowledging that there is no one in this world who is close to you in such a way that is beyond how we were intended to be close to our Father and our Creator. Like, you don't get to claim the special privilege of this person that I love the most hurt me the most, and it's unforgivable. How could God ever expect me to forgive them? Well, because the relationship God made you and him for was even closer than what you would have ever supposed to experience with any earthly relationship. Like, you think about this in terms of, like with Rebecca and me. Like, we are the two people in this world that have the ability to love each other the most, and we also have the ability to hurt each other the worst. If I totally betrayed her and trashed our relationship, it is not as grievous as the fact of how close you and I were supposed to be with God, and yet we've trashed that relationship many times. So when he speaks here and Jesus is saying, forgive us of our debts as we have also forgiven our debtors, for if you forgive others of their trespasses, your heavenly Father will forgive you as well. But if you don't forgive others, your Father will not forgive your trespasses. Jesus isn't swinging for this isn't a T-ball. Like, this is like, coach pitch, but the coach is like a Major League Baseball pitcher that's throwing like 100-mile-an-hour fastball. Like, what he's calling us to here is he's saying, look, you need to recognize the depth of what you have done against your God. And when you understand that, and you understand his forgiveness to you, and his compassion to you, and his love for you, despite that, that's the moment where you finally have what you need in order to forgive others in the same way. The moment that you recognize that your offenses against God are not minor, but they are considered trespasses, is the moment that you can turn around to those who have trespassed against you. And don't go say that to them. You're just going to sound weird if you show up in your life. You trespassed against me, and God said, it's weird. But the moment that you realize that's the parallel here, and the level of forgiveness that you're called to, is the moment that you finally are going to be able to forgive them in the way that Christ has forgiven you. And you'll start to get to show the love of Christ to them. And so I want us tonight, as we're going to spend time in prayer, can I get a couple people to help me pass these out? I know y'all probably have forgotten what these are, but I'm back, and so are they. We may not have enough, actually. We just have to share. We'll just share. Tonight we're going to spend time in prayer over this. And the things we're going to pray for are going to be in alignment with this to help us. The first thing is just for us to develop awareness that we would not lessen the level of forgiveness offered to us by Jesus. That we would realize that no offense, even by those that we trust the most, is unforgivable. And that we would ask Jesus to shape our hearts and to be more like his. And then for compassion, that we would recognize that Jesus had compassion on us while we were still trespassing against him. That we would reject bitterness, malice, contempt towards those made in God's image. And that we would not define people by their worst grievances against us, but remember they are still image bearers. You know, I would say in the past several years, used to if someone upset me, they were going to know it every time they were around me. Like, I just didn't possess the ability to hide it. The past several years, and this is something I think that is crucial as a pastor as well, it's not like a poker face, like pretending like I'm not bothered by somebody, but the ability to be around someone and to still be kind and friendly and joyful and be glad that I'm around them, even when they've wronged me or they've wronged someone I care about. It is getting to the point of recognize that that person is not solely defined by that one mistake that they've made against me. And that God's not just called me to love them unless they really hurt me. And then let that become the defining thing of them for me. But instead, do what God has often done for me, which is like, you've sinned against me. And that is true. And we're going to talk about it. And I'm going to convict you over it. But I'm not going to define every aspect of your life about that. Like, I'm still going to meet you. I'm still going to have a relationship with you. I'm still going to care for you and love you. I'm going to be joyful when you come into my presence and welcome you with open arms. And I'm still going to confront what you're doing at the appropriate times. Like the ability to be able to let down those offenses at times and still love that person genuinely is when we actually get to the point of maturity of being able to see that person as more than just their offenses against us. And remember, they are a deeply loved child of God, made in his image. We don't love people just because of what they've done or not done to us. We also need to love them in the way that God's loved us, which is, you realize he loves you because of who he made you as, and also because of who he's going to make you into in the future when he restores you. And so he keeps that in mind. He knows both ends. And so don't get lost in the middle. And we need to replicate his heart in that. The people that are one way today will not hopefully be that way in a year from now. And we need to love them in such a way that we don't destroy our ability to participate in their life in the future because we just wrote them off at a certain point. And then forgiveness. That God would make us a forgiving people, not with cheap forgiveness that demands little action, but with costly forgiveness that requires us depending on Jesus' Spirit. And that we would not confuse forgiveness with removing all consequences, but instead, like we talked about this past week, restoration requires responsibility. Not vengeance, responsibility. So I want us to just take some time. You can pray in groups with you at this. I'm going to change this up just a little bit. And or you can pray by yourself and pray through these things. But I just want us to pray through this because this is something that I know hits home with every one of us, forgiving those who have wronged us. So let's just spend some time doing that.